Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the latest episode of Hardcore Photography. I'm your host, Mike, and I'm here with my good friend, Sticky Rick. And here's a good analogy that I like to use. You check out a magician, a stage magician, and sometimes you see these magicians are just like, they're amazing. They nailed it. Like there was this guy that was on. There's a new a new magician on America's Got Talent, and he's freaking good. He's really good. There was one from the previous episode or the previous season. I think his name was Lim Shin. Yeah, I think he was. I think he's Korean or Vietnamese or something like that. This dude was. He was probably the greatest. One of the greatest close-up artists I have ever seen. And believe me, yeah, and I've seen a lot of magicians. Right. Somehow he had translated close-up magic to the big stage, and we know that's extremely difficult to do. Right. Because you have to take it, you have to balance the misdirection of close-up magic.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the problem, because when you're on big stage, it's hard to get 5,000 people to look at one thing while you're doing something else, behind your back.
Right.
But he pulled it off. So the thing is that we know that the magical techniques, there's not a lot of them, and almost everything that he did has been done before. But the way he presented it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. So it's the same thing with music and the same thing with photography and all other things. We know that almost everything has been done to some extent.
Right.
But there's still a lot of room even to define a style.
I like that analogy. Look over here. Don't pay attention to this. Look at this.
Yeah.
It's this direction of, I'm showing you the same magic you've seen 1,000 times before. I'm just doing it a new way.
Yeah.
While pulling your attention to something completely new to you.
Yeah. Actually, the first time I heard that, I was probably 12, and my stepbrother had a friend in the neighborhood who was a magician, and we went over and he showed us some tricks, and then we were talking to him, and he told me, he says, there's really only a handful of techniques. It's just the way you present them. And he was probably maybe 14 or 15, and he had already figured this out. And it's the same thing with photography. There's a handful of techniques, but there's an infinite number of combinations. But it gets harder and harder.
You just brought up magic, and I just thought of completely off of our complete subject, which I'm mad now because we've actually done really good about talking about photography almost our entire podcast this time.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, I'm proud.
The Penn and Teller. They're not great. They're not great magicians.
No.
I mean, they're much better now than they were when they started out. The brilliance of them is, I don't know if it came about naturally, like they fucked up a trick and then made a joke about it to the audience. That's the magic of them, is that it doesn't matter whether the trick goes off or not. They've got an arsenal of jokes to tell if it doesn't. Yeah.
Actually, I saw who was it? Oh, it was a pool player, very famous pool player, Mike Massey. Yeah, Mike Massey. Mike Massey's probably one of the greatest trick pool players in history, and I met him at a tournament and actually beat him. So that's my claim to fame, is I beat Mike Massey. Ha ha ha. Well, when I did that, I was down to the 8 ball, and he told me he pulls out his book and he goes, if you sink that 8 ball, I'm going to give you a free copy of my trick shot manual. And I was like, oh shit, the pressure's on, right? Because I want that book. So I made the shot. And, of course, I told absolutely everybody that I did it. Then I got him to autograph it. But when I started reading the book, there was an entire section on how to get out tricks that you fuck up. And one of the things he said was, you try it twice. If you don't do it, move on, because people are going to be like, oh my God, this guy's boring as shit. He keeps and he keeps fucking it up. So what he said, so he had an entire arsenal, just like Penn and Teller. He had his own arsenal, and it was all ways of getting out of not being able to do a trick. And some of them were as simple as, yeah, that trick sucks, but hey, check out this one. A lot of times it's simple. Yeah.
You have a spare fire in your back pocket that you can yank out just to take everyone's attention off the one you just fucked up.
Yes, that's the thing. You have to have your backup plan. You have to have it, and that's the same with Penn and Teller. I've seen magicians that straight fuck up and then move on. Oh, Johnny Carson. Correction, Johnny Carson. Now we know Johnny Carson was an amateur magician, and he was probably fine. I don't even remember. But here's what I do know about him, and it annoyed the shit out of me. His jokes were not, his monologues were not very good. But even when Johnny Carson told a joke that was not funny, people would laugh, and then he would make a comment about how he just bombed, and they'd laugh again. It was it was like the guy got 2 laughs for every joke. It was nuts. I'd never seen anything like it. Now, here's the thing. I will never take anything away from Johnny Carson. That guy, he could control an audience like any magician. It didn't matter if his stuff was funny. Nobody even freaking cared. They looked at Johnny. He did his thing. He told a joke. Sometimes they were funny. Sometimes they weren't. And if they weren't, he immediately moved on to the next one. It's like, don't waste your time.
You're talking about a guy. You're literally talking about a guy that comedians used to look at, that they knew if they were asked to sit down and have a conversation with him after their set, they had made it.
Yeah, I had heard that. There was God, who was it? I think it was somebody talking on that show, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, and he was talking about that, and he didn't understand what the stagehand had told him. He didn't understand what the stagehand was told him. He didn't understand what the stagehand had told him. And Johnny had invited him out, but he didn't go out. He stayed in the background. And Johnny was talking, hey, why don't you come out? Oh, okay, I guess he's not coming out. Okay, whatever. So he talked about that and he laughed. But yeah, it was generally understood. If you do the show on the Carson show, and he asks you out, you did it. You nailed it. Yeah. And people watch that. People would watch that. Oh, this Johnny called him out. Okay, then he can get on our stage.
Another great, when you talk about classic comedians and how they were and stuff, I've got 2 great examples of 2 completely different men, both geniuses in their own right, but how they dealt with other comedians. George Carlin. The guy wrote, most comedians will say if they ever get, 3 different hour-and-a-halves out of them, that they felt good about all 3. That they felt like they had actually done something with their lives.
Yeah.
Here's a guy who every couple years had a new hour-and-a-half in him.
Yeah.
But what did he do to help out other comedians? There's nothing out there saying he ever even gave a shit about other comedians. And maybe that's because no one really gave him a hand up when he was coming out. He made his own bones by himself. Now, on the other hand, you have oh crap, another guy who just died within the last 15 years or so. His comedy was his stand-up was edgy. His movies were childish as hell. The No Respect guy.
Dangerfield.
Yeah, Rodney Dangerfield.
Rodney Dangerfield.
Now here's a guy.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring his name up.
Here's a guy who he had people who helped him out in the early days. Obviously he was middle-aged by the time he even started comedy. I think he was like in his mid or late 40s. But once he made it, and after he had kind of made a big enough name for himself, he went out and just helped comic after comic. We're talking he'd loan him money. He'd take him to Vegas with him. Say, hey, come do an opening set for me. He was just known as a very charitable guy with, here, I'll give you a hand, but, I'll help you, and then let's see what you can do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why people, there's a handful of comedians that people will talk about forever. My personal favorite is Brian Regan, and anybody who doesn't know who Brian Regan is should. And his brother is also a comedian and was the owner of the hardware store on Home Improvement. Dennis Regan.
Oh.
Dennis Regan. I think he pronounces it Regan. Well, we'll call him Regan. So Dennis Regan is a hardware store owner, and Brian Regan pretty much concentrated. He did a few movies, but he pretty much concentrated on stand-up. So he honed it down pretty freaking well. But he also did a lot of like commercials and stuff like that. So Brian Regan is doing pretty good. The cool thing about Regan is that he does not cuss at all, which during the 80s and the early 90s, it was nothing but profanity. And I'm like, okay, well, there's a problem with that. You very quickly, the shock value wears off, and then it's not funny. It's only funny because, oh my God, did he just say that? That's the only reason it's funny. It's nervous laughter. It's not actually funny because anybody can do that. So I go to a jam and I come across this 16-year-old comedian, and I knew he was funny, not in the ha-ha way, but in the way, because his stage name was Stryker Spurlock. Well, here's how I believe he got his name. Spurlock he got from Morgan Spurlock, the guy who did the Super Size Me movie.
Okay.
But Stryker, I believe he got that from Jeff Stryker, the gay film actor. So Stryker Spurlock, I'm pretty certain that's where he got it from. So I knew that this kid was a little too cool for school. So he starts telling these extremely dirty jokes, and his parents were in the audience. Okay, so I don't know. Now, if I was 25 and I'm telling dirty jokes and my parents are in the audience, okay, that's one thing. I'm 16 and I'm telling these jokes, that moves from edgy to kind of weird. So he comes over and he thanks me, and I was with Karen at the time, and he thanks me for laughing. And I go, yeah, cool. I didn't say anything to him, but what I wanted to say was, these people are not laughing because they're all adults and you're a kid and you're making these horribly dirty jokes. And they are not interested in hearing a 16-year-old talk like that.
Right.
Profanity becomes unfunny after a little while because it's pointless. It makes who cares? Brian Regan does not do that. Brian Regan, most of his stuff is situational, and he also has that kind of he can cultivate this kind of a dopey look that he has when he's about to hit you. And somebody was talking to him and asked him how do you do that? He goes, I didn't even know I did it. It was just a natural evolution. So Brian Regan is a great comedian, and anybody who is interested in stand-up comedian, if you don't know him, you should definitely check him out. The other one is Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman, the problem with Kaufman, okay, some people will look at Kaufman like he was just a god, like he was the messiah of comedy. The thing about Kaufman is